This is Solomon Grant, a billionaire so cold, his own staff called him the man made of stone. One morning, his maid broke the biggest rule in his mansion. She brought her 3-year-old daughter to work. So Solomon lay down on that couch and pretended to be asleep. He wanted to catch them, but what that little girl did next broke a heart that hadn't felt anything in 9 years. And when you find out why he cried, you'll cry too. Before we go any further, do me a small favor. Comment where you're watching from tonight and tap that subscribe button, because this story is going to test something in you, and I want to know how it makes you feel. Now let me tell you about a man named Solomon Grant. Solomon was 58 years old, and there wasn't a person in this city who didn't know his name. He owned banks. He owned buildings that touched the sky. Men in expensive suits stood up straighter, just walking past his office door. But behind the walls of his big mansion, the staff had a different name for him. They called him the man made of stone, not because he was cruel. He never raised his voice. He never fired anyone in anger. He simply felt nothing. No smile ever touched that face. No warmth ever came out of that house. And there was a reason for that. A reason so heavy, most people who worked for him for years never learned the truth of it. 9 years ago, Solomon had a wife named Grace and a little daughter named Amara, who was only 4 years old. One rainy evening, on their way home from a birthday party, a truck lost control on a wet road. Solomon got the phone call at his office. By the time he reached the hospital, both of them were already gone. He never spoke of that night again. Not to his staff, not to his business partners, not even to himself, if he could help it. He had every photograph in that house taken down. He banned laughter in the hallways, not with a rule written on paper, just with the cold, quiet way he'd look at anyone who forgot. The mansion became a beautiful, empty place, and somewhere deep inside that stone, a small piece of Solomon was still standing in a hospital hallway, waiting for news that never came. Now, into this quiet, frozen house, walked a young woman named Naomi. She was 29, soft-spoken, and she cleaned Solomon's mansion 5 days a week. Naomi was a widow too. Her husband had passed 3 years back, leaving her alone, with a little girl named Zuri, just 3 years old, with big brown eyes and a laugh that could fill up any room. Naomi worked double shifts most weeks. Every dollar she earned went toward rent and toward Zuri's medicine. The little girl had a weak chest, and the doctor said she needed her treatments every single month, no matter what. Naomi never complained. She showed up early, she worked hard, and she was the only member of the staff who had lasted more than a year in that cold, silent house. But even good, hard-working people can find themselves standing at the edge of an impossible choice, and Naomi was closer to that edge than she ever wanted to be. There was one more person in this story you need to know about. A man named Mr. Reeves, Solomon's financial advisor. Reeves had been with Solomon for years, handling the money, the accounts, the household budgets. But Reeves had a habit of leaning close to Solomon's ear at the end of long days and saying things like, "Sir, I'd keep an eye on the newer staff. Small things go missing in houses like this. You never really know people." He said it soft. He said it kind. But every time he said it, a little more suspicion settled into Solomon's chest, like dust on an old shelf. And Naomi, hard-working, honest Naomi, didn't know that a man she barely spoke to was quietly building a case against her, one whispered sentence at a time. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. Naomi's babysitter, an older woman from her building, called at 6 in the morning with a shaking voice. Her own mother had fallen sick overnight, and she needed to go to her right away. Naomi stood in her small kitchen holding the phone, her heart pounding. She had no one else. Her sister lived 2 states away. The neighbors were already at work, and she could not, would not, miss this shift. Not with Zuri's medicine bill sitting unpaid on the counter behind her. So Naomi did the one thing she swore she'd never do. She got Zuri dressed quietly, packed her favorite blanket and her one small teddy bear into a bag, and walked into Solomon Grant's mansion with her daughter's little hand wrapped tight in hers. "Just for today, baby," she whispered, kneeling down by the laundry room door. "You stay right here, quiet as a mouse, and Mummy will come check on you every little while. Can you do that for me?" Zuri nodded, solemn as a tiny soldier, and settled onto a folded blanket in the corner, with her teddy bear hugged to her chest. Naomi closed the door soft and went to start her work, her heart racing with fear the whole way down that long marble hallway. But what Naomi didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Solomon Grant had been standing at the top of the staircase the entire time, watching every single second of it. And he had already decided exactly what he was going to do next. Solomon came down that grand staircase, slow and quiet, the way he did everything now. He walked into the great room, and for a long moment he just stood there, looking at the closed laundry room door at the far end of the hall. A child, in his house. After 9 years of silence, after 9 years of empty rooms and locked-away photographs, there was a 3-year-old girl sitting on a folded blanket behind that door. Part of him wanted to march down there and end Naomi's employment on the spot. But another part of him, a part he hadn't heard from in a long, long time, wanted to know something else entirely. He wanted to see what kind of child grows up in a small apartment with a widowed mother and barely enough money for medicine. Reeves's whispers echoed in his mind. "You never really know people, sir," so Solomon decided he would find out for himself. He walked to the antique table near the couch and set down a few things, careless, like a man who'd simply emptied his pockets. A gold watch that cost more than most people's cars, a leather wallet, thick with cash, a small velvet box holding his late wife's diamond cufflinks, the one thing in this house he'd never been able to give away. Then Solomon lay down on that long leather couch, folded his hands over his chest, closed his eyes, and made his breathing slow and even. If anyone came looking for what they could take, he would see it happen with his own eyes. He would finally have his proof. And he waited there in that big, silent room, testing a little girl he had never even met, without stopping to ask himself whether that was really a fair thing to do. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and then, so soft you could barely hear it, the laundry room door creaked open. Little feet padded across the marble floor, hesitant, careful, the way children walk in places they know they're not supposed to be. Zuri had gotten bored sitting alone in the dark little room, and curiosity, the way it does with 3-year-olds, had pulled her right out that door. She walked into the great room, clutching her teddy bear, and there she stopped, staring at the tall man lying so still on the long couch. Solomon kept his eyes shut, kept his breathing slow, and listened as those little feet came closer and closer, right up next to that table where the gold watch and the money and his late wife's diamonds sat waiting. This is the part where I want you to comment, never judge, because I promise you, you have no idea yet what this little girl is about to do. Her small hand reached out. Solomon's heart, hidden and still behind his closed eyes, braced itself for the sound of that watch being lifted, or that wallet being opened. Instead, her fingers moved right past all of it. She wasn't looking at the money at all. She was looking at him, at the sleeping stranger with no blanket over him in a house that felt cold, even with the heat running. And in that one small moment, this little girl showed more character than half the grown men Solomon had ever done business with. Zuri pulled her own little blanket off her shoulders, the same blanket her mother had packed that morning, and laid it gently over Solomon's chest, patting it down at the corners the careful way her mother tucked her in every night. Then she tucked her worn teddy bear right into the crook of his arm. She dug into her tiny dress pocket and pulled out one single biscuit, broke it clean in half with her small fingers, and set one half down on the table beside him. "For when you wake up," she whispered to herself, satisfied, like she was finishing an important job. And then she leaned down close to his ear, so close Solomon could feel her breath, and she whispered 5 words that stopped his heart cold in his chest. "Sleep well, mister. Angels watch you." Then she kissed his forehead, soft as a feather, turned around, and toddled right back toward the laundry room, like nothing in the world had happened. And Solomon Grant, A man who hadn't cried once in 9 long years, a man his own staff called Maid of Stone, lay frozen under that little girl's blanket, with his eyes still shut, because those exact 5 words, in that exact soft voice, were words he had heard only one other time in his life, whispered every single night by a little girl who used to fall asleep in his arms, before that rainy road took her away from him forever. And when Solomon Grant finally opened his eyes, they were already full of tears. Solomon lay there on that couch for a long moment, not moving, tears sliding sideways down into his ear, the way tears do when a man is too stunned to even sit up. The blanket was still tucked around his shoulders. The teddy bear was still wedged under his arm, and that half a biscuit sat on the table beside him, like the smallest, strangest gift anyone had given him in 9 years. When he finally found the strength to sit up, his hands were shaking. This man who negotiated million-dollar deals without blinking, shaking over a broken biscuit and 5 whispered words. He called out, voice hoarse and cracked, a voice that hadn't needed to call for anyone in a very long time. Naomi, just her name. But something in the way he said it carried all the way down that marble hallway. Naomi came running, her cleaning rag still in her hand, her face already pale with fear. She had heard a man's voice call her name in a house where nobody ever called anybody's name, and every terrible thought ran through her mind at once. She's fired. She's in trouble. Zuri did something wrong. This is the end of the only paycheck keeping her daughter's medicine paid for. She rounded the corner and saw Solomon Grant sitting upright on the couch with tears on his face, a child's blanket around his shoulders, and her own daughter's teddy bear in his lap. "Sir, I am so sorry," she said, the words tumbling out fast, her hands already reaching for the blanket like she could undo the whole morning. She wandered out. "I told her to stay put. Please, I need this job. I'll pay for anything she—" But Solomon lifted one hand, gentle, stopping her mid-sentence, and what he asked her next was not at all what she expected. "Where," he said, his voice barely holding together, "did your daughter learn those words?" "Sleep well, mister. Angels watch you." "Where did she learn that?" Naomi blinked, confused, caught completely off guard by the question. Her fear started to loosen just slightly, replaced by something else. The strange feeling of being asked about a memory instead of being fired over one. She sat down slowly on the edge of a chair across from him, twisting the cleaning rag in her hands, and told him a story she hadn't spoken out loud in years. 9 years ago, she said, before Zuri was even born, Naomi had worked nights as a hospital volunteer, sitting with sick children whose parents couldn't always be there. There was one little girl she remembered above all the rest, 4 years old, sweet as sugar, staying in that hospital during her final days, while her father was somewhere else in that same building, trapped in an emergency surgery of his own, unable to reach her in time. Naomi had sat by that little girl's bed every night that week, and on the very last night, the child had taught Naomi a bedtime phrase, something her own mother used to whisper to her. The little girl said, and she wanted Naomi to keep saying it to people who needed it, even after she was gone. "Sleep well. Angels watch you." Naomi had never forgotten it, and when Zuri was born, she'd whispered it to her every single night since, the way you pass down something precious without ever fully understanding why it matters so much. Solomon sat completely still, his whole body gone cold, because the pieces were falling into place one by one, like stones dropping into still water. "What was her name?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "The little girl in the hospital. What was her name?" And Naomi, searching back through 9 years of memory, said softly, "Amara." Her name was Amara. The room went silent. Solomon closed his eyes, and for the first time since that rainy night 9 years ago, he let himself remember every second of it. The surgery that kept him from his daughter's side. The nurse who told him a kind volunteer had stayed with her, so she wasn't alone. A volunteer he never got the chance to properly thank, because by the time he reached that hospital, there was no one left to thank anyone. "You were with her," Solomon said, his voice breaking apart completely now. "You were with my daughter, at the end, and you never even knew it was me." Naomi's hand flew to her mouth, and now both of them were crying, in that cold, quiet great room. A billionaire and his maid, connected across 9 years by a bedtime phrase, whispered into the ear of a little girl neither of them expected to lose. For the first time since Grace and Amara died, the house didn't feel quite so empty. But Grace has a way of arriving right before disaster. And just as Solomon reached out to take Naomi's trembling hand in his, footsteps came fast down that marble hallway, sharp and certain, and the great room door swung open to reveal Mr. Reeves standing there with 2 security guards, holding up his phone like a weapon, already speaking the words that were about to tear this fragile moment apart. "Sir, I think you should see this. Your maid has been stealing from you for months. I have proof." Solomon rose slowly from that couch, the tears still wet on his face, and looked at Mr. Reeves standing in the doorway, with his phone held up like it was some kind of trophy. "Proof of what, exactly?" Solomon asked, and his voice had changed. The shake was gone from it now, replaced by something colder and steadier, the voice of a man who built an empire out of nothing. Reeves stepped forward, smug, tapping his screen. "Security footage, sir, from this morning. Watch." He turned the phone around, and there on the little screen was Naomi's bag, sitting in the staff room, with Reeves's own hand slipping something small and gold into the side pocket, a hand that thought no one else was watching. Reeves hadn't realized the angle of that camera caught his own reflection in the window behind him, clear as day. He was so busy building his lie, he never noticed he'd filmed his own confession. Solomon held that phone in his hand for a long, quiet moment, and something inside him, the something that had been frozen for 9 years, finally, fully woke up. "Reeves," he said calmly, "how many years have you told me not to trust the people who actually do the work in this house?" Reeves's smug look started to crack at the edges. "Sir, I don't know what you think you saw, but—" "I saw you," Solomon said, cutting him off clean. "Plant something in an innocent woman's bag, in my own house, on the same day my daughter's blanket ended up on my shoulders for the first time in 9 years. The security guards exchanged a look. Reeves's face had gone the color of old paper, and what Solomon said next, he said slow, so every word would land exactly where it needed to. "Get him out of my house, call the authorities, and check every account he's touched in the last 5 years. Because a man that comfortable with a lie this small has almost certainly told bigger ones." They found those bigger ones within the week. Reeves had been quietly skimming money from the household accounts for over 3 years. Vendor payments, staff wages, small amounts here and there that added up to nearly $200,000, all while whispering suspicion onto the very people whose paychecks he was stealing from. He was arrested, and Solomon made sure every dollar he could recover went straight back to the staff Reeves had shorted for years, including Naomi, who received 4 months of back wages she never even knew she was owed. But money recovered, friend, is a small thing next to what Solomon did next, because a man who spends 9 years frozen doesn't thaw out and stay quiet about it. Solomon paid off every one of Zuri's medical bills that very week and set up a fund to cover every future treatment the little girl would ever need, straight through until she turned 18. He sat down with Naomi and told her, gently, that he'd be covering her nursing school tuition too, because a woman who sat by a dying child's bedside out of nothing but kindness, expecting nothing back, deserved a life built on more than a mop and a cleaning rag. Naomi cried for a different reason that day. Not fear this time. Something closer to disbelief that this kind of grace still existed in the world. And 6 months later, Solomon opened the east wing of that big, quiet mansion as a free daycare center for every one of his employees' children. Clean, bright, full of toys and laughter, and the sound of little feet running down hallways that used to only echo silence. He named it simply Amara's house. On the 1-year anniversary of that Tuesday morning, Solomon did something he hadn't done in 9 years. He drove out to the cemetery on the edge of town, walked slowly across the grass, and knelt down in front of a small gray headstone with his daughter's name carved into it. He laid Zuri's old teddy bear gently against the stone, Naomi had let him keep it, a gift for a gift. And he stayed there a long while in the quiet, saying nothing at all, because some things don't need words. Before he stood up to leave, he whispered the only thing that felt right. "Sleep well, baby girl. Angels watch you. Daddy's not made of stone anymore." And somewhere behind him, in the car waiting on the road, Naomi and Zuri sat watching, because Solomon Grant, billionaire, had asked them both to come along that morning, not as his staff, but as the family he never expected to find again. So let me ask you something before you go, friend. If a stranger's child prayed over you while you lay still and quiet, pretending to be someone you're not, would you have opened your eyes the same way Solomon did? Or would the world have to break you first? Type your answer below and tell me where you're watching from tonight, because stories like this one deserve to be shared with someone who needs it. And if this story moved something in you, if you believe kindness still finds its way back to the people who give it away for free, press that subscribe button right now. It costs you nothing, but it tells an old storyteller that somebody out there still believes stone hearts can heal. Good night, friend, and never let the world make you forget how to feel.